Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me. We are having a snow day tomorrow, so I'm going to go over a few of the points that I was going to cover in class. I won't go over everything. I think this will be about 30 to 40 minutes, and I have a couple activities in the PowerPoint that I'll ask you to submit in the module. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and we're just going to go through the PowerPoint together. So this week you should have read the visual elements chapter of the book. It talks about the formal elements such as line, shape, color, composition. These are the kind of basic units of a work of art that when combined together will elicit some sort of emotional response. As we talked about last time with propaganda, oftentimes these types of images are meant to elicit an emotional response, and they're doing so through a number of formal elements, and so we're going to go over some of those today. And you will be responsible for creating a formal analysis in your final paper. So just thinking about ways that line and movement, color, how those things come together to create a message, or how those things come together to create either cohesion or disruption for the eye. So let's talk about some of those issues. In this piece together, for instance, what is the emotional response that you get from it? As we talked about last time, the group that had this image, there was fear, sadness, stress. And so if we start to unpack exactly what's happening, we notice that there are these dark colors. There's also, just in terms of color and lighting, there's high contrast, which helps to create the sense of drama. We can think about the body language of the figure, that he's drowning. His arm is kind of pulling out toward the viewer. That's called foreshortening, where a part of the body, because it's closer to us as the viewer, is going to appear larger than another part. And so in this case, the hand is much larger than the actual head in relationship. So that's also creating a dramatic point of view. I mentioned the color choices, the dark colors, the blue and black, the dramatic lighting. Something else that your book starts to talk about is one of the basic units of a work of art is the use of line. So you might not notice it, but there's this, so you could, I think it's actually called implied line. There's not an actual line that goes from the finger to the eyes, but it's implied. And I'm going to show you a little bit later in this PowerPoint, where we have these kind of lines that are started to be created by the composition, thinking about when your eye first hits the image, how do you move through the space? And so this text, you're actually going to read it from left to right as this one long line. So the text actually creates an implied line in the top and the bottom, and then the image in the middle creates this diagonal line, which tends to bring your eye down from the top text down through the bottom and into the talked section. So even when you might think of the idea of line or shape as something much more formal or much more direct, such as this Mondrian painting, where you have the most primary shapes, primary units of art. You have line, you have shape, square, rectangles, and then obviously the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. But line, shape, these things can also be applied to more complex compositions, and I'm going to talk about that as we go on. So I also have this little part in here, pop quiz. Is this work representational, abstract, or non-objective, non-representational? I'll have you submit the answer for this in your Module 3 submission so that you can get participation. In another piece, this is a photograph that I was actually just looking at. Maybe I could show you. I got the book at the library yesterday. So this is the book here. It's about shopping and the relationship of art and how it's been influenced by just mass consumerism and shopping malls, shopping centers, kind of the rise of shopping in the 20th century mostly. And so I found a really strong similarity between this photograph, which is obviously just, you know, a photograph of something something that we see every day, something that we're accustomed to seeing, but it bears a striking resemblance to this image of just this grid, these straight lines, geometric shapes, and also the use of primary colors, red, yellow, and blue. You'll notice almost all the colors here. Similarly to here, there's a lot of black and white as well, although here the separating lines are actually more white than they are black in this case. But thinking about how something so pared down, such as this image, is actually can be related to something that we see in the real world, I thought that was an interesting comparison. But also just thinking about the use of line, the use of shape, and how we see the world. The world isn't actually made out of lines or shapes. It's just the appearance of certain visual information. So in this case, when you have these shelves, they tend to make these kind of lines in visual sight, or these various boxes and bags, as well as the lines in the ceiling and the pillars in the store. They also tend to make lines or shapes depending on how you look at it. So thinking about line in a more of a loose interpretation in this case. And then even more kind of abstracted use of line is in this painting by Inka Essenhai. And I know there was not this exact one, but something similar to this in the book, in this chapter. I think about the use of line here, where this is a painting. So in this case, you have a photograph, and it's something we actually see in the real world. And there's this implied use of line. In this case, this is a handmade photograph. And the line is actually these somewhat unclear images of what it really is, but it looks like some sort of organic growth, or vines, or like coral reef, or some kind of natural plant-like organism. And these shapes are also making these kind of lines through the space. The difference between these two images, or from the first one, the use of line is very bold, very rigid in this case, really separates these segments, kind of categorizes them, or boxes them off. In this case, the use of line is a little bit more fluid, although there is structure. And then this use of line is much more fluid, much more organic and whimsical. It also really does a good job of leading your eye through the space. So ultimately, line, whether it's direct line or implied line, it's meant to take your eye through a composition, lead your eye typically throughout the canvas so that you see all the different components of it. And again, in both the photograph and in this painting, I ask you to define, is it representational, abstract, or non-objective, non-representational? You can just submit this in the Module 3 discussion. And then again, thinking about how elements in a work of art create implied lines and a sense of movement and composition. These are a couple examples I pulled from the book. So how a line produces movement. This is Theodore Géricault, The Raft of the Medusa. All of these bodies, thinking of the body or the figure as a sort of elongated shape, the bodies tend, and also the limbs, the arms, legs, they tend to create these lines as well. So if you were to just draw over all of the limbs and the body parts, you would see just a bunch of different lines probably going in all different directions, but actually kind of coming together to create some pattern of directionality. And so if you look at the little image down here, I can zoom in. The arrows are showing how the eye moves through the image and through the space. And so there's this kind of upward motion up to the top right, and it moves out on the right side as well as moving out on the left side. And so it's important to think about how the eye moves off the page, because then eventually the eye should come back onto the page. So it's this kind of continuous loop. You want the eye to move off and then move back on, to be just sort of dynamic in the sense of movement and rhythm, and just exciting for the eye to look at. And so something that seems very seamless or effortless on the part of the artist, who, you know, it really works when you look at it. There is a kind of scheme behind it and a sort of system to how the elements were arranged to make it feel a certain way for the viewer. So although there's a sense of drama and a little bit of chaos, there's also a sense of aesthetic pleasure and just the balance and the harmony in an image like this. And then this one, a little bit less dramatic, a little bit more calm. In this image, we notice there's this kind of zigzag, organic, soft line, almost reminiscent of the Inca Essenhai painting, more organic, a little bit easier to digest. There's a lot of elements here that are almost coming in contrast with each other. I could even probably annotate it and show some lines on here. Let's see here. How do I? Oops. Just bear with me 1 second. If I can find. So if I wanted to draw, not sure if it's going to let me draw. Well, anyway, if you just imagine drawing a line for every body part or every limb, arm, and leg, you'll notice a lot of the lines are probably butting up against each other, and that's going to create some visual drama and visual contrast, and that's helping to evoke the atmosphere and the tone of the scene, which looks like people are dying, people are fighting for their lives, they're traveling this stormy sea, and it's just a hard voyage for them. Whereas in this scene, a little bit more playful, a little bit easier to look at. The colors are a little bit softer, more reminiscent of springtime. And so the composition and the movement is a little less dramatic. Thinking about shape in the same way. So in this case, these three figures, they form this triangle, which the book talks about the invisible triangle or something like that, the triangle with no sides or no angles. This it's often a common repetitive motif in art when the subjects form together into this triangle, because it helps as a viewer. You're trying to make your way through the whole space, and so having this triangular shape allows you to reach almost every area of the scene. What it also does is it connects these three seemingly very so if we look at the scene, we say, oh, there's a mom and two children, the Madonna and these two babies. But in the image, they're all kind of connected into one. And so there are these elements that have cohesion in the image. It's meant to tell us something about what's happening and the tone and the attitude of among them. So because they're all grouped together in this similar shape, in this one shape, there's a unity among them. If the two babies were out all the way to the side and the Madonna was in the middle, it would create a disruption or a disunity between them. So the formal elements, such as the implied shape in this case, they're helping to tell us something about the nature of the relationship, the nature of the narrative behind this piece. For the next part of the module, I'm going to have you watch this quick video. This is a story about a world where women are dots and men are lines, and the different kind of qualities of the people in this case. And so you'll notice that they talk about one man who is a straight line and one man who is a squiggle, and why the woman is attracted to one of them more than the other. And so as you watch, I'd like you to just jot down some notes about each of the characters, the dot, the line, and the squiggle, and it also will talk about shapes. So just as many formal qualities as come up that come up in the movie, take some notes. Think about any kind of positive or negative messages that they say about each of these elements. And then you're not going to do the next part, but just you can go ahead and submit that as well, any notes that you find. And you could stop the video for now and then come back to watch the next part when you're done. So you can include these specific questions, or you can just talk about the different qualities. Why was the line seen as uptight? Why was the squiggle seen as undisciplined? How did their physical characteristics translate into their character profile? So it's all about thinking about the fact that a very simple unit, a simple visual unit, a simple visual element like a dot, a line, a shape, how these translate into emotive qualities as stiff, uptight, rigid, undisciplined, free thinking, and how there's both positive and negative structured qualities with each of them. For the next section, I'm not going to have you get into groups for this. Um, and for the first part, line quality, line weight, I actually did not go over that. So that is something that you could explore. I'd like you to just on your own, just to choose one of these, one or two of them. All of these you're going to eventually have to make a definition for in your glossary. And I believe that's milestone 3 or 4, so it will be an assignment eventually. So the more of these that you work on now, actually, the better. But in class activity for your participation points, go ahead and write a definition for at least one of the words and choose an image to represent the idea. So similarly, how I showed you up here for implied shape, you can just use an image from the textbook, or you could use an image that you found on your own. It helps sometimes to look at these art examples because artists are consciously using some of these ideas. So it can be something you find in the book. Try not to copy the book directly, just because I want you to apply these principles to works that you are now experiencing, and you will have to think about this for your final project. I know I keep talking about it and just want to reiterate the fact that it's right around the corner, and I'd like you to just start thinking about the social issue, what kind of symbolism you want to use, and then also how that symbolism is going to be translated into an emotional message. If you do want to have an emotional message, you don't necessarily have to, but just thinking about when you have, symbolism of a woman and 2 children in a landscape, for instance, in this kind of composition, how that creates a certain affect. Or a photograph like this of a lot of geometry, primary colors, in immense amount of information, how that translates into some sort of feeling or some sort of tone that can talk about whichever issue you're interested in. So it's not only the symbolism that you're thinking about, but also the way in which you put all those pieces together. And then a couple other ideas to talk about positive and negative space. So positive, so it sounds kind of like exactly what you would probably just think at first, your first instinct. Positive space is like the kind of the thing in your image or in your photograph, and then negative space is like the space around it. You could maybe think of that as like background. So to try to give some really concrete examples, in this image you'll notice the positive space is almost taking up the entire image, and so there's just these little corners here, little fragments that are the negative space. And so what that's doing is it's putting the viewer right up close to the image. It's very dramatic. It's obviously in your face, and it sometimes creates a sense of congestion and obviously drama and potentially chaos. Whereas in this image, there's a lot of negative space. I would consider the negative space like all of this kind of sky. And then the positive space could be considered like the ground, the figures, this tree, and then also these papers flying through the air. And so in this case, with less positive space and more negative space, it creates a sense of distance between the image and the viewer. It creates a little bit more of less of a visceral or like bodily feeling, and more of just a kind of like open, maybe more cerebral perception of the scene. As you have distance, you can kind of analyze what's going on, since you have the illusion that you're further away from it. Negative space, although we think of it as like the nothingness of an image, I find it's actually really important in letting the eye breathe. And so it's if you have overwhelming information in an image, having some negative space throughout the image, which can be employed in different ways. It's not always like the space around the image. You might even think on this in this image here, like these areas where the flesh is pressed against the glass and it's just kind of like white, or like this like neutral, like flat plane, like that almost creates a sense of negative space, because it's not quite as defined as the fingers and the shadows here of the actual like difference between the body parts. And so negative space, having a lot of negative space in an image, it creates a very meditative scene. It can really give your eye a break and give you time as the viewer to think. So if your message in your final project is to make your viewers think about something, maybe consider incorporating a lot of negative space, because it's typically not done as much, just because artists tend to want to show, the thing they want to show, whether it's a person, the landscape, the figure, an object. And so we oftentimes ignore the space around. But the space around is actually just as important as the thing itself, because when we look at any image, the only reason we see the thing itself is because we see the space around it. So you want to make sure you're thinking about that relationship. And even if you do have a figure in a space, think about how big or small is that figure. Is it tiny? Is it medium sized? Does it take up the whole image, like this image in the left? And how big or small you make it is going to impact how your viewer interprets that image. And then I think I'm on my last slide here, unity, variety, composition. So I think I've already mentioned these things. I use this example of Fragonard to talk about unity. His images, they all really kind of blend together into one, even though it's a scene with a landscape and trees and clouds and figures and fabric and this lush foliage. It feels like it's all kind of coming out of one puff of smoke or one material, or this sort of ephemeral, dreamlike trance that someone is in. And so there's this harmony and this unity among all of the elements. They all feel like they're connected and originating from one source. So there's this kind of poetry behind it. And of course, since it's an oil painting, we know it is all made out of one material. And so oftentimes I think that is the motivation of an artist, is to make everything in the painting feel unified, to feel cohesive, to feel like it's coming out of one world, out of one space. But there are times when an artist might choose to purposely disrupt parts of a painting and make them not feel unified, or make things feel like they're clashing against each other, again, to create a sense of drama. And so in this case, this image on the right, Colin Chillig, he is this kind of hyper-realist painter. He has the ability to paint images like they're photographic, and so you'll notice that there's this face here, but then on top of it is kind of another image of another face upside down, and then we start to see the collar of his shirt, but it sort of abruptly ends here, and then there's just a splatter of paint. Over here we see what looks like his palette on the page, and then these various texts that are supposed to mimic like thought bubbles or speech bubbles. And they're saying, okay, and it is important to be no, I think maybe it was nobody, and then it was like whited out and then says no one. And so they're this kind of cartoonish language that's applied to like this serious academic classical realist painting. And so in this case, he's trying to purposely make these things not unified. And there's a sense of humor in this kind of image. So it's humorous. It could also potentially be thought of as maybe a little psychotic or crazy. There's definitely a kind of psychology behind his works when you have this technical skill that somehow, that just becomes distorted, and there's this kind of crazy scheme or strategy behind it that you're not quite sure, you're not quite aware of what it is or why it's happening. You can tell this person has skill, but has purposely trying to destroy the painting and make it something else. So I think it's an interesting interpretation of how to avoid doing some of the things that we expect in art, that sense of unity, composition, cohesion. He's purposely disrupting our expectations. And so I'm basically done with this for now. I want to go over the couple of things that I want you to submit again. And so I want you to write whether these three works are representational, abstract, or non-objective. This one, this photograph, and then this painting right here. You could just write the word. You don't need a definition. And then after that, I'd like you to watch this video and go ahead and just jot down some descriptions, both positive and negative, for the dot, the line, and the squiggle. And also, I think the shape is on there. Any kind of positive or negative adjectives from the film, based on all the characters. If that's not too much work, I think the video is only 10 minutes. Should be manageable. And then you could use these questions as pointers. And then also choose one of these words and write your own definition for it. So don't just take it from the book, and choose an image which you can get from the book to explain the idea, and just maybe jot down a couple notes about what in that image is representing the idea. And go ahead and post that into the Module 3 in-class activity. And from there, I have the homework on here, read chapter 5, take quiz 3. Make sure everyone has done quiz 2, as well as journal number 2. I have sent out emails to those who haven't. You'll read this article here, Scale and Proportion, until the Great Wall of China section. So this just kind of goes further to talk about a couple of the elements that I started to discuss. And you'll just read onto here. Not very long. And then watch the virtual instructor. You do not need to do the exercises at the end of the videos or watch the former space videos. And then apparently the color section says that to dull a color, you should mix gray into it, but it does not discuss adding the complement of the color. And so if you remember, I think in the first day of class, I talked about the color wheel and the complementary colors, so the colors that are on opposite sides of the color wheel. So it's like red and green, purple, yellow, orange, and blue. So if you're painting and you have purple and you want to make a duller version of purple, you can add its complement, which is yellow. So same with green and red, blue and orange. Or you can add gray, either one. And so the virtual instructor is just a series of videos that you're going to watch here just to further talk about some of these things. Here is the elements of art, color theory, about 7 minutes long. And color is our next topic for next week, so I think that should be a really interesting topic to go over. And just wrapping up here, journal entry number 3. Take a picture of a work of art at the Art Institute or select a work on the AAIC website. You can also go to another museum. I would like you to go to a museum if you can. I know it's not always possible for everyone, but it's a really great experience, and I think there are free days. I know the Art Institute is free on Thursdays. The Museum of Contemporary Art is free on Tuesdays. And I think also as a student, you typically get a discount. So it's just a fun experience, especially now that you're learning about art. You might feel a little bit more engaged by the work. And you're going to look for a work that features a diagonal, horizontal, or vertical line. Using this word, and so we talked about that up here with, even in horizontal line as well as vertical, you talk about Mondrian. You could probably find a whole wing of, well, at the Art Institute, there's the modern wing, which is where this painting would have come from. So you'll probably find one of Mondrian's paintings, but certainly you can find more. There's vertical, horizontal lines in this painting. This one has diagonal lines. There's the implied diagonal line. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like a literal line the way you would see in a painting like this. It can be more of an implied line the way we talked about in some of these paintings. This is a diagonal, and then the text is like a horizontal line. This also has a series of diagonal lines going in different directions. You can even talk about something like this. There's these diagonal lines and the horizontal line that frame the 3 figures. So I think you can probably choose any image and find a way to relate it to it having a diagonal, horizontal, or vertical line. Although this says that prominently features, but just I think your argument for it is more important than the actual element. And then using this work, write a 300 to 500 word reflection answering the following questions. What kind of directional line is used? What kind of line quality is shown? We did not go over that today, explicit, contour, implied, or psychic. You will have to go over that yourself. I believe it's all in the book. What emotional impact does the line have on the overall composition? And what other terms from your reading can be applied to this work? Provide examples of 3 terms. So I think as kind of silly and rudimentary as a lot of this is, I think it will be really, really helpful in helping you to just pare down and unpack the different elements that make up a work of art that cause you to feel a certain thing when you see something. So I think oftentimes we see the symbol, we see the image, and we feel like it all happens so fast that we feel the feeling right away. We feel joy, we feel sadness. But this exercise is about unpacking what's actually happening in the image that's making our eyes see something, that's making us feel something. Like what happens in that like split second between seeing an image and then feeling that emotional impact. And so the reason it's important is because when you start to design your own image, or just start to think of start to think, how does an artist think about their work? They're considering some of these elements: the use of line, shape, movement, composition, harmony, unity. So that'll help you. I think that'll definitely help you to know some of just the most kind of basic units. So let me know if you have any questions. I will probably be grading your journal number 2 if you submitted it. I have many that are not submitted, so if you're watching this and you have not submitted the journal entry, please go ahead and do that tomorrow on your day off. Otherwise, have a great day off. Enjoy the snow if there is any. Try to stay inside and use the extra day to just catch up on work. I know that's what I'm going to do. So I will see you next Wednesday. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.